India, they have been on a roll recently. Big economic data coming in, very skillfully playing between the world's other major powers, China and the USA, walking a tightrope, taking the maximum advantage possible to leverage their international status for massive growth. And if India is set for massive growth, how can we take advantage of it as investors? Well, let's talk about it. And of course, shout out to India for getting on the moon, baby. Yeah, love it. I love it. Of course, they landed on the moon just a couple weeks ago, and that is awesome to see. I want more space exploration. Why are we not exploring space more? Why are we fighting with each other? Come on, humanity. Let's explore space, man. I want to know where the aliens are. Come on. I digress. Also, looking to change the name of the country from India to Bharat, which is pretty cool. Of course, that goes back to a more historical version of the name and the name of the country in India, Hindi versus the English name for the country. So that's kind of cool. Bit of positive nationalism there. But we want to talk numbers. All that stuff is pretty neat. But let's talk numbers. India's GDP set to reach $6 trillion by 2030, according to Standard Chartered Bank. India's GDP will nearly double in the next 7 years to $6 trillion. I mean, that is insanity. The GDP will nearly double in 7 years, man. What? Per capita income will increase to $4,000 by 2030. Of course, still well below some of the major developed countries, but definitely a big boost for the average person in India. So that's fantastic to see. But that number moving nearly doubling in 7 years by 2030. I mean, the 2030 thesis for all investments is absolutely insane, but certainly those numbers coming out of India right now are very much worth paying attention to. We also have this idea that India could rise to be the world's second biggest economy. And this is on a longer time frame, to be fair. You see, if we can get India up to $6 trillion by 2030, huge achievement. However, you have to keep in mind in that situation, USA is going to be worth 30 trillion GDP, China 25 trillion GDP or something. So they got a long way to catch up to be in second place. And of course, China is set to overtake the USA potentially by 2030 as the world's number one economy. So those numbers might actually be flipped around. Maybe China's going to be closer to 30 trillion, USA around 25 trillion, for example. Still, though, that puts India in a pretty distant back seat. But according to this analysis, with India's massive population, which is overtaking China currently, by the way, China on a downtrend, India continuing its uptrend population-wise. The GDP is forecast to expand dramatically in India. Goldman Sachs research projects India will have the world's second largest economy by 2075, which, hey, to be fair, 2075, it's a long way away. If I'm still alive then, well, cool, I guess. That'll be awesome. Now, before we dive more into this India story and, of course, break down how, of course, to actually take advantage of this huge potential growth for the Indian economy, I want to let you know about Wealth Mastery. This is my weekly crypto newsletter. It is jam-packed full of the best information in the cryptocurrency industry. If you want to know about altcoins, you want to know about airdrops, you want the latest news, you want NFTs, technical analysis, we got it. 3 times a week to your inbox for free. You can join our 75,000 weekly readers by using the link in the description to sign up now. Thank you very much. Let's get back to the India story. What's interesting, too, is that India's massive expansion is set to be a key driver for global economic growth. You see, the impact of India is not just on India, because as India's economy continues to grow at such a massive rate, I mean, doubling almost by 2030 is the current prediction. That's got a lot of global impact associated with it. That produces a lot of demand for new products and new business and all these sort of things. But of course, while we do see great growth, we do, of course, have people saying, well, hold on a second. Maybe those numbers aren't really as good as they say they are. And here we go with Ashok Modi being quoted here. It says an annual growth of 7.8% in the second quarter of this year. India appears to be the world's fastest growing major economy. But again, behind the billboards are human struggles on a massive scale. Growth, in fact, is low, inequalities are rising, and job scarcity remains acute. And to that, I have to say, join the damn club. And I know, look, poverty is a problem globally. It's not a uniquely Indian problem. A lot of major economies also have rising inequality and struggle with human suffering. And if we compare countries, some countries are doing dramatically worse or dramatically better than others. But that growth, economic growth, is one of the best ways to lift people out of poverty in the long run. Look what China did. China focused heavily on economic growth, expanding the economy at all damn costs. And it lifted hundreds of millions of people out of poverty in about 20 to 30 years, dramatically reshaping the country, which now has more high-speed rail than every other country in the world combined or some crap like that. Glistening cities. And I know there's problems in the Chinese economy and the real estate market. I understand all that stuff. I get it. But look at the results. It's pretty interesting. So with India set for such massive growth, it also means massive opportunity for, well, all of India, of course, but also for investors in the Indian markets. And it's also very interesting, as I'd like to point out here, that India has been walking a very, very interesting walk here by finding a way to perfectly put themselves between China and the BRICS grouping and their more traditional partners with the United States and Middle East and so on and so forth. So there's this story here. Biden and Modi and G20 allies. The G20 meeting just happened in India. G20 allies unveil rail and shipping project linking India to the Middle East and to Europe. That's pretty damn cool. So that's a big win for India, putting them solidly at the center of a lot of trade coming from the West, going to the East, and of course being an endpoint in of itself for global trade and a massive export potential to bring things to Europe, for example. I like this thought from FX Hedge here. India's moment has arrived and Modi wants a new global order. That's according to Bloomberg. The G20 summit in New Delhi is set to showcase Narendra Modi's attempts to demonstrate that geopolitics goes beyond the USA and China, that India is a player on the world stage. Of course, we inherently know this, but we are seeing a massive rise in India's superstar power globally as a major world power. India, the collective West, we can say the European Union largely, China, Russia. There's really not many other major super global players, Brazil, right? But India is very well positioned to put themselves right at the middle of all of these giant world players and, of course, to benefit economically from it. Officials with knowledge of Modi's thinking portrays India's approach as opportunistic. It is a great opportunity. Why not be opportunistic when the time comes? Looking for ways to take advantage of the intensifying U.S.-China competition and Russia's war in Ukraine. India has refused to condemn the war or to join international sanctions on Moscow, happily stocking up on Russian oil and weapons, even as it looks to strengthen military ties with the U.S. India also has one foot in the U.S.-backed Quad security grouping with Japan and Australia, and another in the BRICS bloc that includes China and Russia. Put themselves right at the middle of everything as a potential major broker in those conversations. Interesting as well, we did see some dissent for some different topics when it came to the BRICS group. But they did end up fully supporting the BRICS expansion, which is now adding 6 new countries, including Saudi Arabia, Iran, the UAE, Argentina, some of the world's biggest food and oil exporters. India seeks to fill a China-sized gap in global economic growth. Again, that $3 trillion in GDP growth by 2030 adds a lot to global demand, global exports. It's pretty damn massive. India will contribute just over 15% to global growth this year alone, which is pretty damn massive, according to the International Monetary Fund. Of course, right behind China's 35%. China is still the big boy, right? The big player here. But what is so shocking, the entire Western Hemisphere, that's, Mexico, the United States, China, Canada, the other sea country, Brazil, only contributing 14%. That's insanity. India is in a geopolitical sweet spot, with Modi seeking to assert leadership on the so-called global south amid support from the US to counter Beijing. India finds itself in a very, very, very interesting spot, diplomatically, geographically, economically, which makes me think, can I invest in that? The answer, of course, is yes. And to be very clear, I'm not saying to invest in any particular ETF over another. I'm just sharing information about some of the most popular ones here. But of course, one thing I have been thinking personally of doing is adding an India ETF into my stock investing portfolio. I haven't decided on which one yet, but I will be diversifying into an ETF that specifically targets the Indian market and will hopefully capture some of that $3 trillion of growth over the next 7 years. So what are the top India ETFs for 2023? Well, thanks to the guys at Investopedia over here. They've listed out a few of the top ones. If you want something with very, very low fees, expense ratio of only 0.19%, you can look at the Franklin FTSE India ETF, or FLIN, if you will. If you want the best one-year return, the Columbia India Consumer ETF, higher expense ratio, but performance over 1 year, 19.12%. You want the most liquid ETF. That's the iShares MSCI India ETF. Decent performance, bit lower fees. So there are a lot of options. That's just 3. There's more. There's a lot more, of course, if you want to really start digging in and looking around. And even though Indian equities have underperformed the S&P 500 in the past year, as we've discussed at great length in this video, the growth potential for Indian markets is absolutely there moving into the future, which is why I am considering, have not done yet, but I'm considering adding an Indian ETF to my stock portfolio to get broad exposure to the Indian economy moving forward. But let me know what you think. Is this something that you're interested in doing personally? Are you thinking of investing in India broadly, or are you putting your money somewhere else? You think, you know what? I'm all in on AI. I'm all in on electronic vehicles, whatever it might be. Let me know in the comment section. Thank you for watching today's video, and I'll see you next time.